Welcome to the show, Brain Health Unchaining Your Pain. And I am really excited because today we have Marilise de Villiers on the show, who is a great friend. She's a high performance coach like myself, and boy, does she have an amazing story to tell. So make sure you've got your raw ready at the outset, so because we're going to be doing a lot of roaring in this conversation. For those that you don't know Marilise is the founder and CEO of Raw Coaching and Consulting. She's an executive coach, best-selling author of the book Raw, How to Tame the Bully Inside and Out, and also behavioural change consultant who specialises in finance, technology and cybersecurity awareness, in particular culture and talent. Welcome to the show, Marilise.
Oh, thank you so much, Ruth. It's amazing to be with you today. And that's a brilliant welcome. Awesome. Love your roar.
So I know you've been on a phenomenal journey, and you've also had the opportunity to give a TED talk on your journey as well, which is a really brilliant TED talk. I love listening to it, and there's some aspects of it I can really relate to. In the context of where you are today, could you just tell the audience what really fires you up, what you're passionate about, what your roar is, vocally, that you love to express?
Yeah, absolutely. It is about people finding the courage to speak their truth, and essentially, I call that it's your roar. And of course, with that courage comes also the great quality of being vulnerable and being open to share your story. So I think for me, I am passionate about people living their best lives and making their whole lives work and becoming their best selves.
Yeah. And I think that's so important, because we can very easily get ourselves stuck in the process of living rather than living our best life. We go through the sort of activities that, the day-to-day activities that get us through the day, but we don't take that time to step back, reflect, and understand, am I stepping into my best self? Am I showing up with the courage and authenticity that I need? Am I doing what's necessary to be my true authentic self? And is the environment that I'm in allowing me to be me? And I don't think people take that time to do that sort of self-reflection, to really understand how quiet or how loud is their internal roar.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. So I'd love to explore your journey, if you will. But before we do that, could you tell everyone, because the show is all about brain health and unchaining your pain, what does optimal brain health mean for you personally?
So I sort of think about brain health in the context of stress resiliency and how we cope on almost like a minute by minute basis with the demands that life throw at us, and how we stay really present and in the moment and focusing really on the task at hand, right here in front of you right now. And I think for me, I've had so much neural dissonance in my lifetime, just from the anxiety that I get because people, catch you off guard. But it's that ability really to regulate yourself in your environment, in your interactions, and staying really calm and present.
And I think that is so important, and I love the fact that you bring that environment and the interaction with the environment in, because we so often just focus, particularly when we talk about mental health, on the impact that is happening within the person. Absolutely. And we don't look at the system that is affecting that person's brain, their neural networks that are being developed as a result of the environmental exposure that they're experiencing, the toxins in their environment that could be physical toxins or toxins from a people perspective, toxic people. And we kind of often think mental health wise that it's the person that is at fault, and actually we need to look at the system causing the person to behave in the way that they're behaving, which can be incredibly complex and, you know, multi-layered, depending on life experiences. But the key there is to look at the system and the environment. And I think for me personally, and I'm really keen, excited to explore your journey, is the environment not only in your home life, but how the environment in your workplace really influences how you're showing up.
Absolutely. And I write about this in my book. I talk about the toxic trio. So my personal journey is very much finding myself after 20 years in a very successful director position in a company, very successful corporate career, but working day in, day out with a bully, and allowing that bully to bully me day in, day out. Now, when I say allowing that bully to bully me, people get quite sort of, you know, sometimes I have no control over it. Like I can't help to be bullied, right? So I'm like, no, I played a part, and that was one of the first steps in my recovery, was really to say and to take personal ownership and full ownership for my role that I played. But to come back to the environment, so when I talk about that, I talk about the toxic trio, because a bully cannot bully without a culture or an environment that facilitates that, you know, that helps him or her to actually bully other people. So it's the bully, the culture, and the actual individual, the target. And I think, you know, it's so absolutely vital, you know, and I get quite, you know, passionate about this, because I always say that leaders in organizations have a moral and legal responsibility to create safe and inclusive spaces where people can thrive, where people are not afraid to speak up. So ties it back to the raw as well.
And, you know, I think that's really important, because, you know, often people look at their culture as the best behavior, but actually the culture that you have in your workplace is defined by the worst behavior that you tolerate.
Absolutely.
And if you tolerate bullying, then your culture is a bullying culture. And it's important that we give people the power to speak up and say, this is not okay. You know, this is not okay for me, how you're treating me, and this is not okay for the team either. And I know you talked quite a bit about the, you know, the shock that the team experienced, not just yourself. Absolutely. When it all came to a head. Could you go into how it sort of evolved? Because I know it, and you know, for me, I can really relate to this, but I would love you to tell your story first. Is how it evolved over time, the toxic culture that fed the bully and allowed them to thrive, that then, you know, obviously allowed you to forced you into survival mode.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, it all came to a halt one day. It was in the boardroom, and he sort of came in. I was with my whole team, and he casually announced that I will be working on a project full time. So no longer responsible for the entire portfolio, managing the team and the portfolio, but just working on one project, and that he was going to step in to save the day. He was going to be me in terms of, you know, running the portfolio. And that was just the moment where I just, you know, basically I was still thinking at that point, you know, this is only temporary. That, you know, it's gonna go away, because once we've delivered this project, things will be back to normal, right? So I'll be back reinstated in my role. And then one of my team members actually asked, so what is happening with Marilises' role? And he basically just, again, casually announced that that role no longer exists. And I think that was the moment when the penny sort of dropped for me, and where, first of all, you know, talk about neural dissonance, and sat there and I could barely breathe, you know, I could barely, you know, I kind of swallow my tears back, you know, I couldn't really.
You had no idea, did you, that this was about to land on you in front of everybody?
Absolutely, I had no idea. So kind of sat there, just really not making eye contact with anybody, but really just almost hyperventilating inside. And, you know, sort of afterwards, just ran to the bathroom as quickly as I could, you know. I mean, obviously was really, really upset. And it was there in the bathroom where I sort of looked in the mirror and I realized, you know, I had this little voice inside me that just said, enough is enough. And that's sort of the point where I took my power back and where I decided, you know, I'm going to quit. And of course, it was more out of desperation than anything else. But I mean, that had a 4-year, you know, like for 4 years, he just sort of chipped away at my confidence and, you know, kept reminding me basically how incompetent I am.
Even though you're at director level and running a portfolio and a team,
Yes.
you know, and saving his bacon on, I understand, quite many occasions because of the leadership style that he brought to the workplace.
Absolutely, the morale was so low, and this is the thing, and I think one of the hardest things for me was to walk away from my team, because I was that person between him and the team to actually also protect the team from him, and for me that was the feeling of letting my team down was hard, you know. So I felt so responsible for everybody. But obviously losing myself in the process, and obviously damaging my most important relationships with my husband and my 2 boys. And to come back to your point about environment, so my home environment, my home life was, you know, I was not present in my home life either, you know, because I guess for about a year before I left, I was so depressed, and Heine sort of kept things ticking along. You know, him and the boys sort of got used to surviving without me, and I only really, that sort of realization came to me after I left, and I realized how much I damaged my relationships with them. And it took me probably about 18 months, or probably I would say 6 to 18 months, because it doesn't sort of just, you don't just fix it overnight, but it took a long time for me to win them back and to get that strong connection back. And part of it for me was about realizing that if I prioritize me and if I show up as my best self, everybody else around me thrive, you know. So my husband, my kids, my team, my friends, everybody around me thrive. And that was my sort of moment where I realized, actually, I have a responsibility to prioritize me on my list of priorities.
And I really appreciate you sharing that journey, because I can really relate back to it in my experience in the corporate workplace, when I was told I had no emotional intelligence, but that wasn't the start of the situation, you know, and put on a unexpected performance review despite meeting the firm's hard targets that they set and smashing them. But it was the build up, you know, the behaviors, the toxic behaviors by the leaders that I was working with, that was really diminishing me as personally. And I would have, you know, nights crying, phoning partners that I could trust to say, I'm really struggling to get through this. And they say, you can do it. You know, this is fine. You're doing the right thing. And obviously it transpired that, you know, there was a unhelpful culture, which I was aware of, but I didn't take the credit to how toxic it was until I had that really dark moment, when I realized that I needed to do something. But I really applaud you for having the courage to make the decision then and there in the toilets to say enough is enough, because it took me a really long time to realize enough was enough, because I had to validate that I was good enough in a different environment to know that it wasn't me that was at fault, and that it was the environment, the surroundings that were diminishing me, not me being you know, a lesser person because of my own behaviors.
Absolutely. Yeah. And Ruth, it wasn't, I mean, it took me 4 years. I knew for about 3 years, 3 of those 4 years, I knew that he was bullying me. I made little plans to get out. Like I was obsessed about, how am I going to get out? How am I going to get out? But it was that sort of, exactly as you say, I'm not good enough. So you don't think you're good enough that you can walk away and find another opportunity, find a better opportunity. You know, you put so much value or your self-worth is so attached to that corporate job and that identity, that it becomes so hard to have that perspective, to take that step back and to say, you know, this is just not a healthy situation to be in. And it comes back to that self-worth you've mentioned.
And your like experience in the boardroom, you know, was very open, public display of humiliation. Myself personally, it was subversive display of humiliation, where what happened on being announced I had no emotional intelligence, the firm withdrew all of my activities that I really enjoyed doing, like coaching others and being a mentor. All of that was stripped from me at the time that I was put on this performance review. The things that I really loved doing and got value from, you know, really inspiring others within the workplace was all taken. And even at the time, they've told me I needed to find a role, you know, on a project, which is what you're supposed to do. Normally it was done by somebody, but I had to do it for myself. And I found one internally, working in a partner space, in internal development. I was really excited to start, and I told my partner, hey, I've got this new role, you know, I found it really quickly, I'm really excited. And he sent me an email back saying, I don't think you've got enough emotional intelligence to fulfill this role. And so that role was stripped from me, despite it being offered and I was accepted and I was seen as the right person. It was stripped again from me, along with all the others, and I had to go and find another paying opportunity. So it's just such a horrible experience, isn't it? When all that you value, all that you know you're worth, suddenly becomes worthless to another.
Absolutely. And I think it's that moment when so this is classic bullying tactics, right? It's all about that they demand this 100% loyalty. So what I'm sensing with your situation, what happened with me, was this idea that they became aware that I wasn't 100% loyal anymore. I think they were beginning to feel really insecure about the relationship because I wasn't transparent and very forthcoming anymore, because I sort of hid team matters from him, which I didn't do in the past. And so I think a couple of times he became aware that I wasn't kind of warning him that things were about to happen. And I think that sort of, I broke that sort of loyalty, that obsession that he had with me being loyal. And it essentially comes back to control, that sense of I'm controlling you. And that was when I think the nastiness came in, and the sort of the open kind of demeaning and demoralizing in terms of how he then, you know, publicly shamed me in front of everybody.
And I think it seems, you know, I know you did some phenomenal research as part of your book. This is not uncommon. This behavior in the workplace is not uncommon. And you know, when stress is, you know, stress or work-related stress is seen as the #1 epidemic by the World Health Organization. And until we deal with the cultural issues within the workplace, and obviously there's been a huge shift because of COVID, but underlying are the cultural values that you tolerate.
Absolutely.
We're not going to see an improvement in the stress levels of people or the interactions that we have. What could you tell what you discovered for people? You know, you did this great research with other people that had experienced workplace bullying. What were the key themes or key findings that you had from that?
Yeah, I think for me, the main thing I discovered was this is not a gender thing. So women are bullies too. And perhaps more upsetting was the fact that women actually tend to bully other women. And I guess, you know, this is probably not surprising, but 97% of the cases, the bully was more senior or a peer. So it is that abuse of control that you see a lot. And I think the other thing I would say, Ruth, on this, and yes, it does happen a lot, and I think that's also the reason I got so angry and why I wrote my book, because I had conversation after conversation after conversation with people that sort of disclosed to me when I told my story and I shared my story, they shared a relatable story. So I got really angry, and I thought this only happened to me, and that's why I call it a silent epidemic. And I think what makes it even harder to address is this exactly this idea of stress, because stress is not only a bad thing. You know, we need stress in our lives, healthy stress in our lives, to perform, to be high performing, but it's that point where it tips over. And I think the same with bullying behavior. It's that sort of point where it tips over. It's such a gray area, and it's really, really hard to identify and to pinpoint if someone is a toxic bully. I think 70% of the times when people just demonstrate bad behavior and potentially bullying behavior, they're actually accidental bullies. Because they don't mean to harm you, but the impact that they have is harmful. So what I find, and what I always say to people, is that comes back to the need to have the conversation. Of course, don't have the conversation if you don't feel safe, you know. So psychological safety is super, 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 super important. But the thing is, have the conversation if you're not sure, if you feel safe, to actually check out, is this actually someone who's a true bully, or is this actually an accidental bully? And how you would know is that if you point that out to the person, a person who's not a toxic bully, they would be absolutely mortified, A, of the impact that they've had on you, and B, they will change their behavior. But how are you going to know if you're not going to say to them, this is how it made me feel, or help me understand where you were coming from? So it comes back to those interpersonal skills, comes back to those communication skills, and the need to have the courage to have the difficult conversation.
Yeah, and do you know, I think that's so important. I did actually challenge all the people that were part of this "you don't have enough emotional intelligence" label that they gave me. And the worst conversation I had actually was with one of the partners who was specific in labeling me, and they were very abrupt in how they spoke to me. You know, very abrasive and aggressive in the conversation, and very demeaning towards me in that conversation. And then suddenly they flipped to trying to be Mr. Nice Guy. And that actual flipping behavior, I ended up having an anxiety attack because my brain couldn't cope with the personality shift that occurred in the meeting. And fortunately, I had somebody to help me calm myself down. But that was the first time I'd ever had an anxiety attack, and it really took me by surprise because I just couldn't believe, and neither could the person listening to the conversation, the behavior that was exhibited by a partner who had labeled me with, you know, a really demeaning label, and yet was exhibiting the very behaviors that you wouldn't expect of somebody who truly understood emotional intelligence. And I think it's just so important that when we do go for challenge, and I think challenge is the right thing, that we line ourselves up with a defense force to support us, because it can be hard, you know, when you go on the counter attack, as it were. I mean, we don't want to be a counter attack in the true context of it, but you do need that army behind you who can, you know, he'll help you, lift you up and keep you going, and be that support entity to say, you are right, this is the right thing to do.
Yes.
You know, it's right for you to voice this, because this is how we eradicate it. And often that can be absent, can't it? Because people run to the corners because they don't want to jeopardize their own career, and they don't stand up for others.
Absolutely. And this is what you see. You see the the silent majority, and people who, you know, I've had a situation as well where again, it was in a leadership team meeting where, again, he was, you know, demeaning me in front of three other colleagues. And I actually emailed or text messaged one of the colleagues afterwards to say, you know, what is your view on the way that he behaved in that meeting, and had never had a reply. So people really sort of, you know, and I think it stems from fear, and everybody has the same insecurities and the same fears, and just ultimately, I think, worried about keeping their jobs at the end of the day, you know. But it's interesting what you say about the anxiety of flipping, that personality flip. That's exactly what caused my stress and my anxiety, was that not knowing which version of him am I going to see today. Is he going to be the good boss, or is it actually going to be the monster? And I had to walk past his office every day in the mornings, first thing in the morning. So it was literally like throwing the dice, and, you know, which one's he going to be today?
Is it going to be Jekyll or Hyde?
Absolutely. And I got to a point, like, there was a specific point on my walk to work. I had to walk over a bridge, and there was a point on the bridge. When I reached that point on the bridge, that there was like this prompt in my body that sort of started this hyperventilated breathing, because I knew that in a few minutes' time I'm going to have to walk past this office. And time after again in the mornings, I had to phone my husband to calm me down, you know, just to kind of talk to me, because I literally felt that sort of anxiety attack coming. Yeah, crazy times.
Yeah. And it's phenomenal, isn't it, how people and the culture that you're exposed to, you know, affect you, you know, at the beginning of your day. It just phenomenally modifies how your brain functions. Yes. In ways that you know, don't necessarily have the tools to control.
Absolutely.
Because they control your brain, because they're in control of it, because you've kind of lost that control of your you know, your psychological safety has been stripped from you. And these people are now penetrating and adjusting how your brain is functioning, which is just for me, it was such a disempowering feeling, to not have control of myself, and that somebody had stripped that from me.
Absolutely. And I think what's also really interesting is how, you know, I said to someone one day that, first of all, for a long time, I believed that I was a bully magnet. The things we make ourselves believe sometimes. But yeah, and then I kind of said, oh, but, you know, and this was not even with the bully, this was a couple of years later in a different role. I was just saying, this person is such an energy vampire.
Oh, yeah.
And then the
oxygen thief.
Yeah, oxygen thief. And then my colleague turned around and she said, but Marilise, you are allowing him to be an oxygen thief. And it was such a profound moment for me, because I had to realize that actually there is that part that's within my control. I can control my response and how much I allow these things to influence and impact me.
Yeah. So, and I do you know, I love your term energy vampire, because it literally does. They take that energy from you, don't they, that you possess, and it turns it into negative energy, which you then impose back on yourself. And, you know, we can be harmed by really unhelpful words by people, but it's the words we say to ourselves based on the, you know, what could be one conversation that we play over and over in our mind 1,000 times, so it becomes death by 1,000 cuts. But we've only been cut once by this person, but we cut ourselves 1,000 times. And I think it can be we can be so destructive on ourselves. And I love the fact that you talk about the inner and the outer bully. Could you just expand on that a little bit more?
Yeah, so to pick up on what you're saying about the 1,000 cuts, you know, I like to think about it as sort of paper cuts, you know. you think about all those little paper cuts, and it doesn't necessarily, harm you, but it harms you, right? So, so I'm thinking about a particular point I make, or sentence in my TED talk, where I say, unfortunately for many of us, the relationship with ourselves is the most toxic relationship that we will ever be in, and that's the inner bully. So in my words, in my language, that's the inner bully, and you could call that your inner critic, you could call it your imposter, the inner villain. Everybody has different ways of describing their inner villain, inner bully. The reason I call it my inner bully is because it's so linked with my story, and the fact that I didn't not just experience bullying, which I define as abuse in the workplace, but I also experienced sexual abuse as a child. And for me, the connection between the two types of abuse, the impact was exactly the same in terms of the conversations that I was having with myself about I am not enough, I'm damaged goods, that sort of thing. So that's why I call it an inner bully, because not only was I abused by other individuals, but I also started abusing myself, because I then had an eating disorder for 15 years. So between the ages of sort of 12 and 25, I was really quite ill, and I ended up in rehab. So that's why I use the term inner bully, because it is about abuse, but not just others' abuse, but your own abuse, where you are basically harming and hurting yourself because of events and circumstances and your environment.
And I thank you for sharing that journey, because I think it's really important. And I think what we often find is people who've had adverse childhood experiences like sexual abuse as a child look for an out to deal with the pain that they have experienced, and they need something to mask or whatever their decision is in terms of how they want to minimize the pain, often can become their own abuser. So in your case, it was you took to eating. You focused on becoming as fit as you could, because that was your outlet to deal with the sexual abuse that you experienced. But then suddenly it became an addiction, and it became an abuser to you. And so you had a multi-layered abuse experience that actually started off as a great relationship, a great way for you to escape the initial abuse that you experienced.
Absolutely.
And I know your journey is phenomenal, and I just thought your TED talk was just amazing. The insights that you gave is how you were able to really take back control, and it took you to rehab was what necessitated you really doing that. Could you describe how that transpired and how it shifted for you?
Yeah, so I think the realization that I had in rehab, that I had this inner bully, that I had this inner conversation, I think was a real revelation, and then I could start really catching myself and catching that downward spiral of I'm not enough, and I think what I would say is, like, it's not like a straight line. It's not like I walked out of rehab and I was healed. It took a number of years, and you relapse and all those things. It's not. And today still, I have to manage what I eat. I have to manage my exercise, because I have a tendency to want to overdo things, and I have to be careful. But it's getting better and better and better, because I keep working on it, and I keep focusing on it. And most importantly, I'm having more and more kind conversations with myself, and it's that whole self-compassion thing as well. But yeah, so I think it's really about every kind of next step for me has been about recognizing the conversations that I'm having with myself, and catching myself and changing the conversation to a more empowering, positive conversation. But I have good days and I have bad days, you know, but hopefully it's, you know, touch wood, but the good days are definitely outweighing the bad days now.
And, you know, we had a previous guest on the show, Nadia Khatun, who's a fitness coach, and she also suffered from eating disorder as a result of previous trauma. And she also mentioned that it's something that you have to practice daily. Absolutely. You have to work on it daily. It doesn't just go away. And certain things in your life can be a trigger to rear it again. And I think you said in your book, didn't you, that the workplace triggered it back into life again, that the eating disorder.
Yeah, so those sort of patterns of behavior, right? So I kind of recognized how, you know, I was not necessarily binge eating again, but I was using wine, for example, as an anesthetic. So I would come home in the evenings, and instead of going to the gym, or instead of, you know, eating healthy, I will just have a couple of glasses of wine, sometimes a bottle, you know, because it is anesthetic. So it's really catching yourself, and I think that was the sort of the silver lining when I left my corporate role. I actually instinctively knew that I had to focus on getting my health back on track. Now, in my world, that was my physical health, and I zoned in. So I worked with a transformation coach for 6 months, and she really helped to knock me back into shape, you know, because I was used to training almost like an athlete, and that just kind of disappeared over the years, and after having kids, and it's just this kind of, you know, snowball. But the whole kind of 6 months straight after I left was so important to focus on my physical health. Of course, the coach worked with me on my mental health as well, so that the two in combination, but it created so much momentum in all the other areas of my life.
And do you know, that's exactly what I ended up having to do. It wasn't about building emotional intelligence. It wasn't about you know, becoming mentally robust. It was about building my energy levels, focusing on getting the best out of myself from an energy perspective, and really that change in my habits from a physical standpoint, that, you know, not drinking wine, that was my go-to as well, to numb the experiences that I had at work and try and forget them. Is cutting that out of my diet, cutting out the sugary sweets that I was consuming every single day to get through the afternoon. Chocolate brownies were my go-to, and I put on loads of weight. And, you know, double lattes, you know, full fat lattes, not even skinnies. And so I was just piling on these additional calories just to escape and feel better in myself, get that sugar hit to feel better. And then obviously it became an addictive habit. And it was important to break those chains, so that I could rediscover the energy that I was used to, like yourself, you know, training not at the level that you did, but having a regular exercise routine, which was so important to help me from an energy perspective, emotional, physical, mental and spiritual standpoint. So important.
Absolutely. Energy truly is everything. And that's why if I take my sort of raw blueprint, you know, I always say, you know, you turn your thoughts and your feelings and your words and your actions into your 4 superpowers. Because it's really about, you know, you are your superpower. And so that's why that kind of, and I'm it's a circle, because the blueprint is a circle, but it's the heart of the circle is that inner game and outer game, and generating energy for life every single day.
Yeah, it's so important, isn't it? And I'd love to go back a little bit, because that energy piece was really difficult for you, your inner and outer game that you had to deal with when you experienced the abuse as a child. Would you mind, you know, expressing the difficulties that you had because of having that voice was really difficult at the time that you experienced the abuse? And I know you were trying to be protective of another person as well.
Yes. So ironically, I've just done the bravest thing, which basically I discovered. Again, this was a moment where I believe God spoke to me and told me that my sister is at the abuser's house. So this was a Saturday afternoon. I was 12 years old. My sister was 8. And I was playing in the garden, and I realized with this voice saying to me, "Go to his house now." So I literally ran to his house, and I remember arriving at his house and being relieved because they were in the kitchen. He was always entertaining the children, making cakes and all sorts of sweets and treats to attract kids to come to his house. And then I was just sort of sat there, watching the situation. And after a little while, I stood up and I looked him straight in the eye and I said, "We are going home now." And I say in my TED talk, that was my very first roar. Roar! So that was a very profound moment. But of course, then that evening we told my parents. So the first thing my sister sort of begged me to do is not to tell my parents, because he was threatening her with a gun.
Wow.
He said he was going to kill my folks. So she was very anxious when I basically said, "I'm going to tell mum and dad." Fortunately, mum and dad, believed us straight away. But of course, the devastation was just absolutely heartbreaking. They were just, both of them were heartbroken. And I think that was the thing that I struggled with the most, is the fact that I felt I didn't really protect my sister. I couldn't protect her. I felt guilty because my parents were going through so much pain and heartache. I also felt, that by speaking up, that I was, disrespecting an older person in our community. And of course, in the 80s, it was like kids are, seen, but they're not heard. So just the fact that I did speak out and I, brought this all to light. And it wasn't just us being abused. There were lots of kids in the neighborhood that were being abused. This was another sort of guilt that I had to cope with. It's like, so it was this kind of blaming myself and feeling guilty and feeling ashamed, because of course everybody knew I'm from a really, really small town, countryside, in a little village, so everybody knew what's happened. And it was that sort of combination of things. I think there was just too much for me to handle. Of course, I told my parents, "Don't worry about me, I'm fine. I'm the perfect daughter, the perfect eldest daughter." And I just sort of carried on with my life, and all the focus was on my sister and her recovery. So I was very much the strong one. And of course, then things spiraled out of control because I couldn't cope. My brain just couldn't cope with all the stuff going on. And that's when I started exercising obsessively, really restricting my food. And before I knew it, I had a full-blown eating disorder.
Thank you so much for sharing that, because I think a lot of people look at an eating disorder and they focus on the disorder and how to fix the disorder. But actually the focus needs to shift on what has caused the disorder in the first place. And for you, often, for many people, often the root cause of whatever, if you want to call it unusual, I'm not going to use the word abnormal, unusual behavior, is trauma. And it can be major trauma that people can't talk about. And I think the fact is that when you were 12, you had the cognitive intelligence to know what actually had happened. But sometimes you don't truly become aware of your childhood experience in terms of understanding the impact and who did what to you until much later in your life.
Absolutely.
When you haven't been able to rescue, like you were really a savior, a lady in shining armor for your sister, because you saved her from future abuse that could have occurred. And the children in the community were hopefully spared as well, who could have been, abused by that particular person. And hopefully the abuse actually, came to abrupt stop. But I think it's very easy for us to not be aware, especially as adults and parents, and you know, you're a parent, I'm a parent, is to not really be aware of the trauma that children can experience because they struggle to communicate that trauma to adults in a way that adults can really understand.
Yes.
And then, as you said, there's that fear factor, isn't there? That what will my parents think? What will the community think? How will they cope? So children end up trying to bear the burden because they don't want to put their parents in the pain or through the pain that they're experiencing in the moment or have been experiencing.
Yeah, there's a wonderful book, and it's exactly the question that we should be asking, is what you're saying. What happened to you? So it's basically Dr. Bruce Perry wrote the book with Oprah Winfrey, and it is absolutely looking at that whole concept of children and, you know, behavior problems, and not asking the question of what's wrong with you, but actually saying what happened to you. And because there's always, as you say, there's always that sort of related trauma, or most often there's that related trauma that is the reason for the behavior in the first place.
Yeah. And I think it's so important. Charlie Smith, another guest, his dad, it was very physically abusive to him from an early age, and he was a pillar in the community. And so he again was silenced. He couldn't say anything because the father was seen as that amazing figure within the community. The family was the, you know, the ideal family, and actually the reality behind closed doors was incredibly different. And in his case, what the outcome of his trauma was the fact that he became he struggled with education and learning, and people would label him as being a, you know, not a good learner, but actually he didn't have the capacity to learn because the physical trauma was preventing him from activating his cognitive abilities. And it wasn't until he realized that learning was going to be his savior out of the abuse that he was in, that he was able to literally overnight shift his mindset and become, you know, a great learner to find a way out.
Love that.
And you know, it's such an important topic, you know, the bulimia that you discuss, and the adverse childhood experiences, that I think it's really important we create that safe space, like you say, in the workplace, for children to have those conversations and talk about what is troubling, you know, what is happening to them, like you said, not labeling the person, but what is going on.
Absolutely.
To help them, you know, talk about it and then get the help that they need.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And in terms of your journey, obviously as a teen, you went through rehab. What would you say to any parent, you know, given you observed how your parents' reaction, what would you say to any parent who's got concerns about their child's eating disorder? What advice would you give to them?
I think it's the toughest advice, because it's the fact that you cannot rescue your child. Your child has to come to their own conclusion, right? So I think what often you see is parents trying to fix the problem, parents trying to fix their children and trying to control it. And I did go through a period where, of course, it started as anorexia, where the doctors had to intervene, and my mum was really, instrumental in intervening with the doctor. But then, of course, they made me eat. All I said is, fine, I'll start eating, and then that's where the bulimia started, because it wasn't about the food, right?
Yeah, because that wasn't the root cause of the problem.
And then, of course, again, it's that sort of extreme anxiety that my mum and dad experienced because they just couldn't make me better. I had to make the decision, and I had to want to get better.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a message for parents around holding a space for your child and loving your child and supporting your child, but not wanting to fix the child.
That's really powerful, and I think that's so important. Is we do look for a fix quite often, and actually we need to give people that space to go on that journey, that growth journey, and they need to own it. Like you say, we talked about, you know, we lost our personal power because somebody intervened and we allowed them to take it away from us. It is, we need to be given the tools at any age to know how we can win it back.
Absolutely.
And that has to be all within our control. And we need to be given the tools to do the control, but not the telling, which is the difference between, you know, the stark difference between coaching and therapy, is that the telling can often make things harder, whereas the coaching, you go on your own discovery journey because you own the decisions that you make, and you understand those decisions. And the importance of stepping into that person that you truly want to be. I'd love to go back into the workplace. So I'm just going to tell my story just quickly. Is when I was in the workplace and I hit rock bottom, told I had no emotional intelligence. I went to HR, and HR tried to pin my behaviors on my past experiences, which I found shocking. And it was like, oh, because this has happened to you, that's why you're not resilient, because it's because of you. So all the labeling went back onto me, rather than for me feeling that HR or the organization accepting their responsibility, taking responsibility for their part in the process. And I know we talked at the beginning about the culture. What do you, and I know you had a very brief conversation, or I'm sure it was longer than brief, but you know, your conversation with HR, what do you think really needs to change in the corporate space to help people be able to work with a centre that is going to support them, rather than behave in a way that is kind of hire and reject a function?
Yes, so I went through a period where I was very dismissive of HR based on my own personal experience and the fact that I didn't feel that I got the support that I needed. And then in my book, of course, I state the research where the majority of people do not want to speak to HR because they fear retaliation.
Yeah.
Because there is this perception that HR works for the company, and HR is there to protect the company, but there isn't a transparent conversation about HR's role and what they are there to do. So this is kind of always, so I come back to this. I believe passionately that leaders, which I include HR in, have a legal and moral obligation to make workplace environments safe and inclusive, where people can, as a result of that, can thrive, where people are not afraid to speak up. I feel really, really passionately about that. I do think HR functions has some way to go. They have work to do. What I've come to learn in the last year or so, because I've been fortunate to speak to lots of HR professionals and did a keynote presentation at a CIPD event, was very, very interesting, because they are probably the people in the organization that get bullied the most.
Wow, that's really interesting. I haven't heard that before.
And I got a really, really new, fresh perspective on some of the really unique challenges that HR is facing, because they are working with the power, the powerhouses. And so it's often, their behavior often stems from the fact that they are accounting to or reporting to the bully. And sometimes the bully is the whole institution. So it's not just always an individual person. It's the culture, it's the environment. It's just the way we do things around here and what's allowed. Those kind of below the line behaviors that are so hard sometimes to pinpoint. So I got a really interesting perspective on HR and quite a lot of empathy for the tough position, like the tough position that they're in.
That's really interesting, because I never really thought of it like that. But you're absolutely right, is that they have to report to these bullies as well.
Yeah.
And that's a tough job for them to do, especially if the organization is rife with them.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so what, in the context of somebody who is struggling in the workplace, or let's start with the struggle, what would you say, and they feel they're being bullied, what would your one piece of advice be for somebody who feels that they're being bullied by somebody in the workplace?
I think it depends on so many different things, right? But I would say if you have a good enough relationship with the individual, it's always worth, if you feel safe, big caveat, if you feel safe, to try and have a conversation and to give that person an opportunity to change their behavior. Now, this is probably more of an early days discussion. This is probably where you've just started working with someone and you've got this sort of sense that they could potentially be a bully. It's worth having the conversation if you feel safe. I think what's more difficult is if the relationship is almost like has gone beyond that point of return, right? To you kind of know the writing's on the wall.
Yeah.
And you don't really know how to get out, essentially, because essentially I think when it gets to that point, it's a case of either you've got to move into another area in the organization, or you just got to get out of the organization. In that case, it's a harder conversation, and of course that's where, again, leaders have that moral and legal duty to create that safe environment where you're not afraid to have a conversation with HR or have a conversation with another leader, because you know that they are going to actually do the right thing. The problem is often they protect the bully, because the bully is often a brilliant jerk. It's the person in the organization that brings in the most money, and of course that's really valued in most companies as the number that you generate for the organization.
Beyond the person.
Exactly. So it is such a tough question to answer, because there are so many different types of scenarios. The main thing is you have to feel safe to have a conversation with someone you trust, because the problem that comes in with, having the conversation, especially with someone inside the organization, is that sort of retaliation. So I'm talking about HR, I'm talking about another leader in the organization. But don't keep quiet, have the conversation. And also I would say is that don't be afraid to walk away. Even if
I think that's so important. Great advice.
Even if it's just to get some perspective, even if you just take a period of sick leave to gain some perspective. I didn't do that. I was like, I refused, because if I show any weakness, the bully has won. So I wasn't going to go on sick leave. And what that meant is that I never had that opportunity to step out of the environment, out of the situation, to really regain a little bit of perspective. So don't be afraid to step out, even if it's just temporarily, to look after your own health and well-being.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, Marilise. And I think that was the thing that really saved me and got me that perspective, was stepping away and rediscovering myself again, and having that opportunity to lead in a completely different environment that was really difficult and challenging, and knowing it wasn't me. And I think that's so important. And the last thing is, what would be your advice to somebody who is in a leadership role, who wants to help, and I know this is a difficult question, who wants to help change the culture to raise it to a new level and eradicate bullying?
I think any company that is serious about employee engagement and about creating a people-centric culture, and let's just call that out, will want to do the right thing. And, if one leader on their own is going to struggle. But I think if you can really, as a leader, start winning those allies and start building a bit of an army of supporters, and people who really, so that ability to influence people to come into that sort of vision that you have, and start with one person by person, conversation by conversation, because I don't think it's going to work to just kind of go all guns blazing. Be prepared to start small.
Yeah, great advice there, because I think, like you say, having those individual conversations and creating those safe havens, that safe haven then grows, and then you can build it throughout the whole organization. But you have to create that safety net as a leader first, don't you?
Absolutely. Yes.
My goodness, Marilise, what a fantastic conversation all about brain health and really unchaining your pain, and the journey that you've been on has just been phenomenal. How can people get hold of you?
So I have a website, marilise-de-villiers.com. So you can get in touch with me on my website, or you can just drop me an email, which is marilise@marilise-de-villiers.com. Or you can find me on any social media platform. So if you just type in Marilise-de-Villiers, you should be able to find me on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is my main profile or platform, I should say, that I use. So yeah, drop me a message. Love to have a conversation.
Yeah, and do connect with Marilise. Her book is phenomenal, Raw, How to Tame the Bully Inside and Out, and all of that information will be posted in the show notes. Marilise, it's been an absolute pleasure and honor talking to you. Thank you so much for sharing your journey on the show, Brain Health, Unchaining Your Pain.
Ruth, thank you so much for having me, and likewise for sharing your story. I really appreciate you doing that, and I loved hearing a little bit more about your story as well today. So thank you.
You're most welcome. So for those that are struggling, you're not stuck with the brain you have. You do have the power to make it better. You do have the power to unchain your pain. If you do need help, please do reach out to ourselves, where we can help you do that very thing. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
This broadcast is brought to you by Wincheck Studios. We are an all-in-one educational platform for podcasters that revolutionizes how hosts leverage content to increase engagement with listeners, downloads, and income. We come together to focus on community, collaboration, and collective impact. For more information on how you can interact directly with our hosts, access exclusive live content with offers you can't get anywhere else from our official partners, join our purpose-driven community by visiting www.winject.com. If you're ready to build a career doing what you love, then we're ready to see you there.